Hello, and welcome to the Kitsap Literary Artist and Writers' fourth Halloween show on the Bremerton Kitsap Access Television. I am one of the hosts, Peter Stockwell. We plan to have another ghoulish fun time today. I think I hear the other host, Mark Miller, approaching.
Bring out your dad. Bring out your dad. Bring out your dad.
You don't sound well, Mark. Take off your mask.
Well, I don't want to incur the wrath of the governor, but I don't know. I guess it'll be okay.
Well, we are social distancing, washed our hands. I am undead. So there's really no worry.
You may be right. Then you and I could go to a restaurant, have a nice bloody steak with 4 other non-related people.
You know the word steak and I don't fit. Unless, of course, it is S-T-E-A-K. But bloody? Now that is an idea I can sink my teeth into.
I wonder if a vampire's bite would be like a vaccination. Never mind.
Well, we do have a show to do, with some local authors and creatives providing some horrific content for the BCAT audience.
In this time of viral fear, what better way to deal with fear but with humor? And humor of the virus, of course. Our first bit of entertainment is with J.W. Capek. She has some scary takes on horrific situations, soon to be included in a collection of short stories published by Blue Forge Press. Uneasy, Volume 2. So enjoy this, then wash your hands.
Ashes to Ashes by J.W. Capek. The spring hellebores hung their fading blossoms over the body bleeding out beneath them. The slugs were already appearing. They slimed towards the mouth, nose, and eyes of the old man, fallen upon a lethal tote of gardening implements. It seemed obvious and fair. Ralph had tripped on a flagstone circling the koi pond and was impaled on the gardening tools as he fell. Carolyn, his wife, calmly called 911 and spoke with an equally calm dispatcher. "There's been a terrible accident in my garden. My husband is dead." Following instructions, she circled the house, through the garden gate, and watched the mansion-way driveway fill with vehicles. There was a police car, a county sheriff's off-road vehicle, a fire engine, an ambulance, 2 more sheriff's vehicles, a coroner's van, and eventually a service van from the Acme Cremation Society. There were EMTs snapping on blue latex gloves, sheriffs pulling out writing pads. The scurry of men and women tried to avoid falling in the pond as they accessed Ralph, the body. It was soon clear to all that Ralph was beyond any assistance. One particular hoary blade was thrust deep into the hemorrhaged midsection, while a stainless steel cultivator was jammed into the chest. It was only guesswork where the grubber on the digging axe was buried. The EMT's rubber gloves were removed, and a backboard defibrillator, emergency cache, were all repacked in the emergency vehicle. It, along with the fire truck, left the premises. The coroner's gloves stayed on through phone calls and moving Ralph about. The crematorium people waited on the sidelines for their turn. A woman officer guided Carolyn into the house and suggested a cup of tea for both of them. "Your garden is magnificent. Your husband must have tripped on the slippery flagstones," the officer offered. "Yes, the moles dig under them. Ralph was always having to fix them." Carolyn was surprised by her own sense of resignation. "How appropriate that today is April Fool's Day, she said, while thinking, too bad Ralph didn't just fall in the koi pond. Drowning would have been less messy. By bedtime, Carolyn was at last alone in the house. The door to Ralph's bedroom remained closed as it always was. Her door was closed to him as well. How had it all come to this, she wondered. How had they grown so far apart that his death was just a relief instead of a tragedy? When the three deathmongers, mortician, lawyer, and Ralph's niece, Jennifer, appeared together at Carolyn's entrance door later in the week, she realized that Ralph was continuing his April Fool's Day joke on her. The mortician, Mr. Toombs, stood with a brown cardboard box in his hands. Well, look at this. The three horsemen of the apocalypse, Carolyn said sarcastically. She reached out and took the cremains box from Toombs' hands. He didn't hesitate to let her take possession. You may go now, Quincy. I'll take care of this. Can you dig a hole? Carolyn looked directly at the lawyer. She took the lawyer and niece around to the garden shed. But is this legal? I've never done this before. He was very nervous now. All I'm asking you to do is dig a hole in my garden, then you can leave. You can look up something or other in rules and torts and another time. I suggest you try the internet. Carolyn never flinched as she gave the young man a shovel. Exasperated, the lawyer simply dug a hole in a widow's garden. That was all. When finished, he gestured to Jennifer, and the two of them circled the house to leave. The young lawyer kept wiping his hands on a handkerchief, trying to get them clean. Carolyn turned her attention to the box in hand. That's it, Ralph. Ashes to ashes and all the other words someone who cared might say. Without further ceremony, Carolyn dropped the box into the hole. She didn't bother to remove the gritty fragments from the plastic bag inside. She shoved the dirt back in the hole with her foot. That evening, she watched the rain nurturing the garden, her garden. In the sunny morning, Carolyn took her coffee out to the koi pond. Walking on the flagstones, she noticed a mound of dirt near the hellebores. Evening brought Carolyn back to the pond, but the soil next to it had a strange mound growing out of it. It was off-white and grainy. It was definitely larger, and she wondered if it could be some unusual fungus growing out from the remnants of the box beneath the soil. Curiosity drew Carolyn to the pond the following day, and she gasped at the sight of a man's figure. Formed from the ashes and adjacent soil, it was Ralph's height. Although the facial features were still obscure, Carolyn would recognize the posture of a man contemplating his garden. Oh, ridiculous! She turned to escape to the house when she heard a familiar voice. You know, Carolyn, those pants really make you look fat. With a butt as big as yours, you should be careful what you wear. Carolyn stopped in shock. She began breathing rapidly as she turned to look at the form in the garden. It was just a lump of dirt, for goodness sake. Just dirt, fungus, and ashes. And it couldn't talk in a snide voice to insult her. She turned again to the house and a glass of sherry to calm her. Looking out of the living room window that April evening, Carolyn held another glass of sherry and surveyed the illuminated gardens. Highlighting the area of the koi, shadows wove around the floor like fingers, except for the statue. The earlier form was now a fully developed statue of a gargoyle, a man gargoyle. It stood as if spotlighted, the Ralph face looking directly at Carolyn. The next morning, with a terrible headache, Carolyn fortified herself to go to the garden in the bright sunlight. She approached the koi pond with some hesitancy. Morning, witch! Carolyn jumped. Her head screamed, this isn't real. This isn't happening. You know, Slag, I never did love you. You were such a mealy little snot. Your father despaired of ever marrying you off. That's why he was so glad when I pretended interest. He and I used to laugh at you trying to be pretty for a social club." Ralph paused, then added, "We knew you would never fit in at the country club. Your father always resented you weren't the son he deserved." "No, no," Carolyn cried, and her heart sank as profanity continued to pour out of the gargoyle's mouth. It used words she had only heard on television, never from Ralph. Disgusting, physically impossible sexual terms, various names for perverted female genitalia, all offensive verbiage was thrown at Carolyn. She stopped processing the words and focused on the hate in the face of her former husband. "Blast you!" was her only retaliation as she spun and ran toward the house. She almost tripped on a flagstone and grabbed at a thorny bush for balance. With a cry of pain, she let go of the branch and saw the garden shed open to her. Rushing inside, her hand was bleeding as she saw the axe on the wall. She struggled to release it and hurried towards the pond. Damn you! You are dead and will stay that way." She lifted the axe and brought it down on the gargoyle head. She heard the crack as it entered and scattered the bone fragments. Again and again she pounded the statue. It offered no resistance, just curses and epithets. Sweating, Carolyn's hands were slippery from her blood, but she held tight and crushed the figure into a lump on the ground. In time, Carolyn allowed herself to be drawn to the garden again. All she saw was the statue of a man standing near the fully leaved hellebores. The figure was gazing at the garden with a rake and shovel in hand. A garden hat topped the casual work clothes. It appeared to be concrete, but on closer inspection, it was an amalgamation of bone fragments and ashes, and it was smiling. Ms. Petra and the Pumpkin Monster by J.W. Capek. As a newly credentialed art teacher in the community, Petra was excited by her first teaching position at the middle school, but was not really meeting students. Because of distance learning, teaching pods, and teleinstruction, Petra missed the personal interaction with students. With October, there would be an opportunity to join the community Halloween drive. Years before, for a variety of reasons, parents decided to forego house-to-house trick-or-treating. Now, parents would chauffeur children around the neighborhood in long processions to see decorations. The youngsters could pop out of the car and pick up candies in the front yard bins. They could twirl and dazzle the homeowner on the porch with their costumes, then pop back into the safety of the automobile. Petra knew children loved scary pumpkins, so she researched online to find a creatively monstrous design. A snarling, undead zombie creature would be terrifying. Oh yes, a zombie pumpkin would be perfect. Horrible. Fall colors began changing early, and Petra eagerly started collecting accessories, decorations, and plans for her first pumpkin scene in her new neighborhood. She bought a pumpkin-shaped tray for treats and lots of very safe and nutritious snacks. At the grocery store, a huge variety of pumpkin gourds were assembled on bales of hay in the parking lot, except for one large orange squash sitting by itself. Children picked up and handled the choice smaller pumpkins, but seemed to ignore the solitary giant. Petra thought it should be entered in one of those biggest ever contests. She decided she had to have it, although it did take 2 carryouts to load it in her car. At home, she had to ask 2 college guys from down the street to carry it into her kitchen and leave it on the cutting board table. "How are you going to handle that?" one hefty student asked incredulously. Petra laughed. "Oh, I'll just cut away anything that isn't zombie-like. I have a handy-dandy pumpkin carving set to help." She wiggled the orange utensil case at them, having purchased it online. The day before Halloween arrived, and Petra stroked the smooth orange skin of the giant winter squash. It epitomized the name of Cucurbita maxima, and she knew she must start on her creative creature. Caressing its curves, it was almost sinful to cut through to the ripe flesh below. Picking up this plastic serrated knife from her handy-dandy pumpkin carving set, Petra stabbed into the crown near the stem. She intended to cut a circle to remove the seeds, but the knife slid off of the curve, breaking the blade. The skin was impenetrable. In her imagination, the young woman thought she heard a chortle from deep within the gourd on her cutting board. She tried other utensils from the kit, but they couldn't begin to penetrate to the rind beneath the skin. "All right, you obese vegetable, you can't beat me." Again, Petra thought she heard derisive laughter from within the pumpkin. Pulling her large kitchen scabbard from the drawer, she confidently stabbed the pumpkin and "Ah!" she shouted, but the sharp blade curved off of the pumpkin and sliced through her other hand. Blood sprayed over the cutting board as she dropped the knife with a scream and ran to the bathroom for first aid. With a whimper, she ran water over the cutting, wondering if she needed stitches. Instead, she bandaged it with gauze. "Never get mad at a pumpkin," she admonished her tear-streaked face in the bathroom mirror. Sobered by her own expression, she added, "Get even." When Petra returned to the kitchen with her bandaged hand, she carried the drill, chisel, and hammer she sometimes used in her artwork. She must conquer the pumpkin. How could she ever teach an art class to a classroom of rowdy middle schoolers if she let an oversized, malevolent pumpkin reduce her to weeping? Petra started the drill and went after the pumpkin, but the cord sparked from the outlet. A force from the squash turned the tool back at Petra as she fumbled, not able to control it. Dropping the drill, she picked up her chisel and hammer, but the evil pumpkin created by her imagination snarled, and a foul effigy emerged from beneath her hands. The beast was carving itself. Folds opened, cracks deepened, and a hideous face appeared. Shocked by the ugliness of the design, Petra tried again to slice the protective skin, to cut away the evil countenance. Tendrils of umber pumpkin flesh slithered out of bulbous eyes. From the toothless grimace of the slash marks where a tongue should have been, only putrid seeds were vomited. Growing, growling screeches vibrated in the locked stare between the zombie and the woman. Screams of a banshee ravaged the room. Were they Petra's or the monstrosity flailing on the cutting board? In the dark of Halloween Eve, the children in cars exclaimed when they saw decorations purchased at the local big box store. In front of Miss Petra's house, there was a table with a black tablecloth, lots of synthetic spider webs, a battery-operated candelabra of flickering LED lights, and a tray of hermetically sealed pieces of pumpkin pie. Each piece included a list of ingredients and warnings about peanuts, nuts, milk products, and gluten. After all, Ms. Petra was a credentialed teacher.
Well, that should wake up our audience, at least those with no stakes in their hearts. Next, we have Mark Allen. Not only is he a horrific author, but he has also produced and filmed terrific films like Early Grave. He will read one of his current works of the macabre with a sci-fi and medical twist.
Efficacy by Mark Allen. The call came in at precisely 3:13 p.m. and lasted 3 minutes. In that time, Dr. Leonard Huffington's universe imploded. His controversial and highly classified clinical trial was already behind schedule and way over budget. This latest setback would kill the program for sure, and likely his career along with it. The call terminated. He tossed his phone down and was too distraught to turn it off. He ran his hands over a mostly hairless head. What was left of his hair hugged his ears and was shorn down to stubble. He stabbed the intercom button. Gina? His office door yawned open. Gina stood framed in the doorway. Yes, doctor? She was the epitome of grace and tranquility. Are you aware of what's happened? Yes, sir. Gina's voice sounded even, her hands clasped in front of her. Huffington leaned back, heaved a great sigh. He looked like he was aging by the minute. Gina wished there was something she could do, but she knew there were larger forces at work here. This is bad, he said. We'll all be implicated. He shook his head in shock. I can't believe he did this. He'd been doing so much better lately. I knew him back in my military days, Gina said. He was always a bit twitchy. You call walking into a crowded mall at noon on a Saturday and opening fire with a fully automatic weapon a bit twitchy? Here was the opening Gina knew would come. May I make a suggestion, sir? What do you have in mind? Margarita Estevez. He grumped. Call her. Gina turned and left, her auburn ponytail bouncing behind her. Jesus Christ, Huffington thought. This was the most serious adverse reaction yet, and this time it got civilians killed. Before, only the subjects themselves had died. Allowing test subjects back into the real world had been a huge risk. Huffington had been against it and had made his opinions known. His superiors had dismissed his concerns. They'll be monitored, they said. We can always bring them back in if they start showing signs of instability, they said. Well, now one of them had picked up a loaded firearm and had mowed down innocent people without showing any prior signs of instability. Talking to Zaxo Pharmaceuticals' top PR person was unavoidable. If he could minimize the company's exposure, it might mean the difference between being quietly put out to pasture and being publicly scapegoated, maybe even indicted. Huffington's phones buzzed. He glanced down at the face. In red letters, it simply read, "The Boss." He hit the button, held the phone to his ear. Mr. Klein. Tell me you have a solution to this mess, Klein barked. We're working on it now, sir. That's not good enough, doctor. We're still in the early stages of the process. 3 words, doctor. Clean this up. The call went dead. The CEO of Zaxo had given Huffington his orders, and he knew what happened to people who rubbed Klein the wrong way. People lost their jobs, their credentials, their careers. Personal and professional reputations got destroyed. Sometimes people simply disappeared. When the corporation in question is a covert contractor for the federal government's bioweapons section, disappearing someone can become a viable solution. Huffington turned in his chair, looked outside. Dark clouds swirled across the sky, angry and inhospitable. Trees in the mostly empty parking lot had shed their leaves weeks before, leaving bare branches in a desaturated world. His office boasted all the perks of success. He had worked all his life to attain them. They offered him neither comfort nor security. Mahogany desk, hand-stitched leather chair, Berber carpet, all meaningless. The corner office with the panoramic view had lost its appeal, and for the first time, he felt vaguely threatened knowing that every guard on the Zaxo compound carried sidearms and AR 15s. A knock sounded at the door. Margarita Estevez appeared in his doorway. Her lined face seemed particularly severe as she strode inside. Huffington disliked Estevez, could not trust someone who lied for a living. Spin the truth and bury it. Lead the public to believe a preconceived narrative. Start with a conclusion, then manufacture evidence to support it. Estevez was masterful at this. If there was anyone who could get him out of this mess, it was her. She eased herself into the chair across from him. "How did you get here so quickly?" he asked. "I was already here on an unrelated issue. This takes priority." "Damn right it takes priority. Mr. Klein has authorized me full power and discretion to shield the company from exposure." Estevez knew that that was not entirely correct, but she did not mention the fact that Mr. Klein had called her as well. "We need to deny any prior knowledge of the shooter's intent. We paint him as a loner, a troubled, psychotic person with a history of PTSD and combat service in Iraq." "So you're saying a complete mental breakdown, that kind of thing?" "Yes." "Any of this true?" "It's all true." She looked at him a moment. "Precisely what was the nature of this study, Doctor?" "Clinical human trials for a medical implant device." What kind of implant device?" That's classified." "Seriously?" Anger flashed in her eyes. "One of your lab rats just killed 7 people, wounded 13 others, and got shot dead by an off-duty cop. The surveillance tape has already gone viral on the net. So cut the crap, Doctor. Tell me what I'm up against." Huffington was astounded. He had not been talked to like that since he was an undergrad. "Now, what the hell did you do to this guy?" "Do you know what the amygdala is?" he asked. "It's a primitive part of the midbrain between the cerebrum and the cerebellum. It helps people sense fear. It influences impulse control, anger, aggression. It's been linked to mental health issues like bipolar disorder." "And this implant?" She already knew where this was going. Huffington considered how much to tell her. A small rectangular device about 1 inch long by a ½ inch wide, attached to the top of the spinal cord. By modulating electrical impulses through the device, we target the amygdala. The idea is to increase the impulse control and minimize the massive mood swings. We achieved 87% efficacy, he added. "What about the other 13%? "It has the opposite effect. Massive emotional outbursts, extreme violence. Until today, we've kept it quiet." "What happens to the test subjects?" "Suicide, mostly. They're all combat vets. That was a prerequisite to the screening process. Some became so dangerous they had to be eliminated from the study." Estevez was chilled. "How many?" "Well, this is the 3rd series of trial. We've had a total of 2,000 test subjects." Estevez's mouth fell open as she did the math. 260 people dead? She stared at this man who called himself a doctor. No, she was staring at a monster who called himself a man.
I now will introduce my friend and fellow editor, Barbara Hart. She will provide some of her own brand of horror.
Hello, girls and boys. This is the Story Lady, and do I have a tale to tell you? It's all about the Princess and the Pea. Once upon a time, there was a prince who wanted to marry a princess. but she would have to be a real princess. He traveled all over the world to find one, but nowhere could he find what he wanted. Oh, there were princesses enough, but it was very difficult to find out whether they were real ones. There was always something about them that was just not as it should be. So he came home again and was very sad, for he really would have liked to have found a real princess. One evening, a terrible storm blew in. There was thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down in torrents. Suddenly there was a knocking at the city gate, and the old king went to open it. There was a princess standing out there. But good gracious, what a sight the rain and the wind had made her look. The water ran down her hair and her clothes. It flowed down into the toes of her shoes and out through the heels, and yet she said she was a real princess. Well, we'll find that out, thought the old queen, but she said nothing. Instead, she went to the bedroom, took all the bedding off the bedstead, and laid a tiny uncooked pea on the bottom. Then she took 20 mattresses and laid them on top of the pea, and then 20 eider-down mattress toppers on top of the mattresses. On this tall stack of bedding, the princess had to lie all night long. In the morning, they asked her how she had slept. "Oh, very badly," she said. "I have scarcely closed my eyes all night. Heaven only knows what was in the bed, but I was lying on something very hard. In fact, I'm black and blue all over my body. Oh, it was horrible." Now they knew that she was a real princess, because she had felt the pea right through the 20 mattresses and the 20 eider-down mattress toppers. Nobody but a real princess could be as sensitive as all of that. So the prince took her for his wife, for now he knew that he had a real princess. And the pea, what happened to it? Well, it was put on display in a museum, where it may still be seen if nobody has stolen it. So the next time you go to the museum, ask the guard where the princess pea is being displayed so that you can take a look at it, if it's still there. And that's a true story. Hello, girls and boys. This is the Story Lady, and I have a tale for you. It's all about the Frog Prince. One fine afternoon, a young princess put on her bonnet and her clogs and took a walk in the woods. When she came to a cool spring of water in the midst of the woods, she sat down to rest. In her hand was a golden ball that was her favorite toy. She was always tossing it up in the air and catching it as it fell. After a time, she threw the ball so high that she missed catching it, and the ball bounded away. It rolled along the ground till it fell into the spring. The princess looked for a ball, but the water was very deep. In fact, it was so deep she could not see the bottom. She began to bewail her loss and said, "Alas, if I could only get my ball again, I would give all my fine clothes and jewels and everything that I have in the world." While she was speaking, a frog put its head up out of the water and said, "Princess, why do you weep so bitterly?" "Alas," said she, "what can you do for me, you nasty frog? My golden ball has fallen into the spring." The frog said, "I want not your pearls or jewels or fine clothes, but if you will love me and let me live with you and eat from your golden plate and sleep in your bed, I'll bring you your ball." "What nonsense," thought the princess. "This silly frog is talking. He can never get the ball out of the spring, and he can never come to visit me. Wait a minute, he may be able to get the ball. So I'll tell him he can have what he asks." So she said to the frog, "Well, if you bring me my ball, I will do all that you ask." Then the frog dived deep into the water After a little while, he came up with the ball in his mouth and he threw it on the edge of the spring. As soon as the young princess saw her ball, she ran and picked it up. She was so overjoyed to have it in her hand again that she simply ran home as fast as she could and never gave another thought to the frog. The frog called after her, "Stay, princess, and take me with you as you said." But she didn't stop to hear a word. The next day, as the princess sat down to dinner, she heard a strange noise. Tap, tap, plash, plash, as if something was coming up the marble staircase. Soon there was a gentle knock at the door, and a little voice cried out, "Open the door, my princess dear. Open the door to thy true love here. And mind the words that thou and I said by the fountain cool in the greenwood shade." Then the princess ran to the door, opened it, and saw the frog whom she'd quite forgotten. At this sight she was frightened, so she shut the door as fast as she could, and she ran back to her seat. The king, her father, seeing something had scared her, asked what was the matter. "There's a nasty frog," she said, "at the door. The frog lifted my ball out of the spring this afternoon, so I told him he could live with me, thinking that he could never get out of the spring. But there he is at the door, and he wants to come in." While she was speaking, the frog knocked again at the door and said, "Open the door, my princess dear. Open the door to thy true love who is here. And mind the words that thou and I said by the fountain cool in the greenwood shade." Then the king said to the young princess, "As you have given your word, you must keep it. So go, let him in." So she did. And the frog hopped into the room and then straight on, tap, tap, plash, plash, from the bottom of the room to the top, till he came close to the table where the princess sat. "Pray lift me up upon the chair," said he to the princess, "and let me sit next to you." As soon as she had done this, the frog said, "Put your plate nearer to me that I may eat out of it." This she also did. When he had eaten as much as he could, he said, "Now I am tired. Carry me upstairs and put me in your bed." The princess, though very unwillingly, took him in her hand and put him on the pillow on her own bed, where he slept all night long. As soon as it was light, he jumped up, hopped downstairs, and went out of the house. "Now then," thought the princess, "at last he is gone, and I shall be troubled with him no more." But she was mistaken, for when night came again, she heard the same tapping at the door. The frog came once more and said, "Open the door, my princess dear. Open the door to thy true love who is here. And mind the words that thou and I said by the fountain cool in the greenwood shade." When the princess opened the door, the frog came in and slept on her pillow as before till the morning broke. And a third night he did the same thing. But when the princess awoke on the following morning, she was astonished to see, instead of a frog, a handsome prince gazing at her with the most beautiful eyes she had ever seen as he stood at the head of her bed. He told her that he had been enchanted by a spiteful fairy who had changed him into a frog, and that he had been fated to stay that way until some princess should take him out of the spring and let him eat from her plate and sleep on her bed for 3 nights. "You," said the prince, "have broken that charm, and now I have nothing to wish for but that you go with me to my father's kingdom, where I will marry you and love you for as long as you live." The young princess, you may be sure, was not long in saying yes to all of this. As they spoke, a shining coach drove up with 8 beautiful horses decked with plumes of feathers and a golden harness. Behind the coach rode the prince's servant, faithful Heinrich, who had bewailed the misfortunes of his dear master for so long and so bitterly during the enchantment that his heart had well nigh burst. They then left the princess's kingdom in the coach with 8 horses, full of joy and merriment, and headed to the prince's kingdom, which they reached safely. And there they lived happily for many, many years.
Next we have a writer and poet, B.J. Bauer. Rebecca was one of the founders of Claw, and we welcome her to provide her own form of horror on this All Hallows Eve.
Today I'm reading a few Halloween poems because poetry is one of my things I like to do, like to write. The first one is called Halloween. We mask our faces and wear strange hats, and moan like witches and screech like cats, and jump like goblins and thump like elves, and almost manage to scare ourselves. Happy Halloween! It's late and we are sleepy. The air is cold and still. Our jack-o'-lantern grins at us upon the windowsill. We're stuffed with cake and candy, and we've had a lot of fun, but now it's time to go to bed and dream of all we've done. We'll dream of ghosts and goblins and of witches that we've seen, and we'll dream of trick-or-treating on this happy Halloween. Next is The Magic of the Night. Resounding sounds trick-or-treat, masqueraders in the street, dancing, singing, some were fleet, some holding hands of tiny feet. Ghosts and goblins galore, Harry Potter's mighty Thor, self-created and from store, donned my porch steps, wanting more. Soon my cupboards were found bare, there was nothing left to spare. When the last small child so fair stood at my door, a snow-white hare. Nothing remains, what do I do? A rattled brain. My thoughts were few. But then I spied on sofa blue a small stuffed toy, a little ooh. 'Twas all I had, this last small gift, did bring my spirits quite a lift. I conjured, cast a spell so swift. It bawed, it blued, it even sniffed. The ew, it twisted in the air, landing on fours without a care, and off it went, quite on a tear, destination we know not where. Halloween. Halloween blood, gurgling scream, little children run and hide. Ghost costumes and flying brooms on which evil witches ride. Haunted house, a shredded blouse, a scarecrow in the backyard, graveyard love. Vampire's blood can make this night scream so hard. A Halloween encountered scene, a night filled with pure terror. Freddy Krueger, plastic Luger, there is no room for error. Rotten eggs, a neighbor begs, please don't use toilet paper. Pranksters pray and run away like they just pulled a caper. Halloween, big eyes of green, a black cat is hissing, loud ghosts say boo, and mom warns you, don't stray too far from the crowd. Trick or treat, a candy sweet, also calories galore. Get off track and circle back, maybe you will get some more. Halloween number 13, a night of goblins and ghosts, pumpkin patches, bag snatchers, and a jack-o'-lantern host. Pitch black night, kids filled with fright, enchanting and scary scene, a full bag will make them brag and long for next Halloween. Have a wonderful Halloween.
Well, our next reading shall be from our great friend, Diane Gardner. DL does great stories, and her next book about Peetlebari is going to be wonderful. So take a listen.
Good evening. I'm Mrs. Gardner, And I'm a longtime friend, well, not really a friend, associate, that doesn't work either. I'm an acquaintance of the Peablebodys who live up on the manor, up on the hill, the haunted house, I guess the whole town calls it that. I'm a little bit concerned about what's happening in the manor. I've noticed that Gerald Peablebody, who is the son of Benjamin Peablebody, who, by the way, is a pure-blooded vampire, his son has arrived from Louisiana with his sister-in-law and son, and they've moved into the manor. I've heard tell that Benjamin Peablebody has died, that there was a storm and a lightning struck a tree next to the house, and then a limb fell off and went through the roof and struck him right in the heart. I'm not sure whether I believe that story, but Gerald came over the other day with his father's journal, and he doesn't seem to believe the story either. He thinks that perhaps his father was murdered. He came to me with his journal and showed me a passage in the journal that I want to read to you, and you can decide what you think. This is about Benjamin Peablebody's estranged wife. A year to the day that my wife and mother of my sons died, I had a vision. From the other side of the planet Neptune, I looked in the mirror until the sun was so bright I could no longer see. It was then that a woman appeared, more beautiful than I had ever laid eyes on, more beautiful than my beloved Sandra, though that is difficult to admit. She told me her name, Alyssa, and beckoned me to join her. She and her sister Ellen had been forbidden to walk on Earth, and so she asked me to stay on the planet she inhabited. I could not. I had my own calling, and I left her grieving for me. I soon found out that our encounter had been real and not a vision. I had indeed traveled in my spirit, and when I came upon her again, it was much closer to Earth. I asked her how come she came to leave her home, and she told me that she fought the gods that kept her away from me. She confessed that her passion was so great for me that her mortality no longer mattered. Of course, my manly instinct gave in, and I embraced her with open arms. I had no fear of feasting on her blood the way I had feasted on human beings, for she was not of bodily form, and there was no blood to be had. Yet when we reached this meager estate where I now live, I write this account, the woman changed. I hated to see the transformation she went through when she entered the door. Flesh peeled off her face. Her hair coiled into serpents. I watched helpless. I thought she would die from entering this world, but Alyssa did not lose strength. Instead, she became powerful, energized. She insisted that we wed, that matrimony would rescue her from her predators and restore her beauty. I obliged the woman, as I felt great pity on her, for she had gone through this trauma because of her love for me. How could I know that the moment we sealed our bond, nothing in my life would be the same? Though I am immune to her powers because of my breed, no human could withstand her spell. That's why I trained my faithful and beloved servant, Richard Cottlebone, to avoid laying eyes on her, and why we have one room where the walls are made of mirrors. For her to enter that room would be a death of her, but a haven for anyone else. Alyssa cannot stand her own curse. In the parlor, Cottlebone is safe. Alyssa has the ability to hide her ugliness. When she does, her beauty is incomparable. Yet her heart is black, as is her sister's. I had no idea that from the moment we were married, I would hate her. She manipulates me daily. There's nothing in this world that makes her happy, and she seems to thrive on contempt. Her distaste for humans has become so vile that I feed only at night and have fallen away from all conversation with humans, aside from Cottlebone and the men married to her sister. If Alyssa were to read this book, as she had forced me to remove passages from some of the other journals, she would tear its leaves to shreds. Were it not for the size of the pocket diary, I am certain this record would be lost. So you see, something seems to be suspicious about Benjamin's death. And so Gerald Peabody is taking it on himself to solve this mystery. However, I'm not quite sure that Gerald Peabody is up to doing such a thing, as he has a health condition. You see, he's very hungry, and he seems to be incapable of feeding.
Go ahead, end it.
Okay. And this ends this Halloween episode of the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers Authors Showcase. You're next.
This wraps up our 4th annual Halloween show, but not wrapped like a mummy, nor in coronavirus. Completed as we always do, we wish to thank the excellent support of the Bremerton Kitsap Access television staff and crew, for without their help, this production would not exist. You can watch our broadcasts on Wave Cable Channel 3 and Comcast Channel 12 at 6 p.m. every Saturday and 9 a.m. on Wednesday mornings. Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers exists to help all authors and creative people to present their art to the Pacific Northwest population. When we get done with the coronavirus, we will meet twice a month on the 1st and 3rd Wednesdays at Spiro's Pizza on Kitsap Way in Bremerton, Washington, when we are not limited to distancing or to hand washing or those awful viral masks. If you are striving to get your creative work out to your community, stop by. And after this Halloween show, I promise I will not bite, and Mark will not either. We may have to sit on the patio. We may have to dress warmly. We may have to watch for Facebook updates and meet up so that we know when we are going to meet.
Blue Forge Group, a nonprofit organization, also helps with our creative endeavors. Through the subsidiary, Blue Forge Films, their staff ensures their shows are posted on YouTube and other visual media. Check blueforgegroup.com for a listing of shows.
And any person viewing in this audience who wants to learn how to produce a public access television show, you can contact the BCAT manager, John Rauch. He won't bite either. He puts up with Claw. I am sure he will be helpful to other groups. So to all you BCAT audience, have a productive and pleasant month. And do remember one thing. We lost many, many different types of shows and events and places to be where you could have met many, many of the local Kitsap and Northwest Olympic Peninsula authors. We will be back.
And remember, trick or treat, smelly feet, give us something good to eat. That is, if you can trick or treat safely with social distancing. I assume masks are all the rage during All Hallows Eve anyways. Remember, we will beat this virus. To paraphrase a $6 million man, we have the science, the know-how, the technology. Peter, want to help me beat this virus?
Yes.
Now we're going to beat the death out of the thing. We got to break it up.
All right.
Okay, stop the rolling for just a second.
Oh, we have that virus we're going to...
Yes, we got to kill it.
Okay, we're rolling.
We're waiting for a hammer.
I've got one.
You've got one?
Hold it up to the camera.
There's our virus.
I think that does it. Have a pleasant, macabre today and a ghoulish tomorrow. This is Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers signing off.